Hey there, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm Shane Snipes with the Borough of Manhattan Community College, and I'm excited to have as my guest today. It is a one-of-a-kind opportunity sometimes when you speak with certain entrepreneurs. And I know when it comes to Brian Wong and the work that he's done with his company, in the marketing space, this is a chance for not only you guys who are interested in being entrepreneurs, but people who are interested in marketing to learn about a couple of different things. So we'll talk briefly about how blockchain might be transforming what's going on with marketing, but we'll also talk about the steps to becoming a marketing entrepreneur. What did that look like? And of course, in the marketing space, he's in the tech space. Brian Wong is probably one of the youngest people who's ever received venture capital funding in the United States because he finished college at age 18. Yes, I'm talking to one of the smartest people I probably ever talked to. And I've talked to some really smart people. So I feel like I'm in the presence of a brilliant person who can share some insights. He's very down to earth, also very direct. That's what I like about him. And I've read some of the things he's written online, and I've read some of the parts of his book that he has. And so he comes at the world in a very practical way. So hopefully we'll get some of that today in a conversation with him. Brian, I wanted to welcome you to the show.
Thanks for having me, Shane.
Yeah, it's great. Great to have you on the show, and great to really dive into some of these pieces. When you first started out, let's start from the very beginning in the terms of, you're in college, finishing college at age 18, what sort of things came into your mind that made you want to be an entrepreneur at that age?
Yeah, a lot of it was just natural. I always like to say entrepreneurship is a mindset. It isn't something you can just wake up in the morning and decide, I'm gonna be an entrepreneur. It has to come through years of sort of this natural formation. And it can be facilitated, but you'll get what I mean in a second. So for example, as I grew up, one of the first times I ever touched a computer, I was like very, very young. My father got me exposed very early on. I played a ton of video games, as you can imagine. I started playing a lot of Counter-Strike. Through Counter-Strike, I then got actually exposed to graphic design because you would hang it on these BBSs or bulletin board systems, and you'd start chatting with people, and we were trying to design an insignia for our clan. So you have like this online multiplayer. It's very geeky, but anyway, so I wanted to design something. So I actually, figured out a way to get a copy of Photoshop. Let's just say when you're 11 years old, it's pretty hard to pay the full price for it. But anyways, I got the copy of Photoshop, started to learn how to design on my own. And followed there wasn't a lot of material online on this, by the way, at that point, but it was like these tutorials online, and I kind of just picked up Photoshop. And it was then through Photoshop that I started designing everything from logos to brochures to school projects to websites, and then eventually started to realize that this skill was something that I could make money with, right? So people were now asking, hey man, can you design a sign for our club? Can you, help with the yearbook? Can you do all this? And it's just like, this is the type of stuff that I could actually charge for. And that's kind of how entrepreneurship came about for me. It was like, I just can now make money off the skill, and people are going to pay me for it. And so great. And that's how I ended up starting. So I kind of already started very early on. I then formalized it when I was 16. We started a web design company, a few of my friends and I. And that's when everything kind of came together. We formed an LLC, and we started to build websites for people. So that started then. And so I graduated early, primarily because I was very, and this is another discussion for sure, but I was very anti sort of strict rules, which is go to school for 16 years and then get out and then start working, right? And it's like that to me felt, way too restrictive. So I said, well, what if I cut that down to 12 years and let's see what happens? And it still appeased my very traditional Asian parents who wanted me to graduate. So I had still had the chance to graduate. And then I did a business degree as well as my undergrad, because they had that program at University of British Columbia, which is where I went to school. And then when I graduated, I still did actually want to work at a company, right? Because my whole thing was like, I want to see what it's like, because I'd never worked at a company, right? So that's when I got the job at Dig. And Dig at the time, digg.com, was a lot like Reddit. And that's what got me started in just my career. So I moved down to San Francisco. I worked at Dig. But then how I ended up starting Kiip was because Dig, as some of the folks may know, ended up losing a lot of traffic and then started to lay people off. So actually 6 months into my job there, I lost my job. So they always say, kind of necessity is the mother of invention. In my case, I needed to invent my own job because I had lost my job. So I was like, I have really no other choice. I could try to apply for something else, but my visa had a lot of restrictions, and I ended up deciding to start a company. So that's when I started Kiip. I also realized that getting laid off, folks on the line probably realize that that is not your doing, right? You get fired if you aren't good at your job, but you get laid off if the company can't afford to pay you anymore, basically. So I was like, well, I did not make any mistakes here. The company did. I'd rather be the person who holds the keys to my own destiny. So what if I had the most control? And the only way to do that was to run my own company. And so that's really the conclusion I came to. And that's why starting my own company was really one of the only last options available that I decided to do.
Wow, I love that as a way to sort of talk about your journey and the way you went from someone who is very curious about something and then managed to sort of build a set of skills, realized its value, created a smaller company. But it feels like also it sort of launched into your it nurtured that part of you to make you more entrepreneurial, to give you the wherewithal to think about your skill as a business.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of circumstantial things, like I said, and it has to relate to something you do naturally, right? Like sometimes I find people get into entrepreneurship because it's sexy, because they think there's something that's hot and hip and they should make. It's like AI and blockchain and VR and AR is cool, so let's build something for it. So it's like, no, if you notice it, like I said, I played video games growing up. I did a lot of design. It is not a coincidence at all that my company has a lot to do with games, has a lot to do with designing a better ad experience. And I happen to, by the way, major in marketing, and my company is in the marketing and advertising space. So none of this stuff is by accident.
Yeah.
And that's why I always tell people who are puzzled, like, what should I do in entrepreneurship? It's just look at your upbringing, look at your past, look at what makes you passionate. As long as you are extremely obsessed and excited about something, you will always figure out a way to make money off of it, right? At what scale is a question. And people forget that entrepreneurship isn't about starting a venture-backed tech company. Entrepreneurship is really starting anything, right? Like, you could be like, we have, entrepreneurship is the basis of the US economy, right? Like, it is, small businesses make up, I don't know what the number is. It's some huge number. I'm sure you have the statistic, but it's like, there's a huge amount of economic activity that's always been since the dawn of man and woman who you can just, you enterprise, you're scrappy, you make money off of services or goods. That's just what it is.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. That is so true. My students are getting inspired right now. They're watching this. They're going, "Wow, this is really great." And you put it in such a great context. This is what I drive home to my students all the time. You need to find what you're just interested in and get curious about it. Like, get curious to a point where you develop enough skills where you can move into that space, where you can think about it. And sometimes it means going to work for another company. Like, you went to work for Dig so that you added a layer of knowledge into your brain from working at Dig, even if it was only for a short period of time, that you didn't have before, that you're now taking advantage of as part of what you're doing.
You kind of use what you naturally gather, and I'll actually gather into one word, which is obsession. So I actually really don't like the advice, to be honest, where it's like, follow your passion, right?
No,
I
no,
think,
it's not about
yeah,
that.
everyone probably says this quite often. It's like, I'm sure your students hear this advice a lot. I think follow your passion is actually terrible advice. What I think it should be is discover your curiosity. Like you said, I like curiosity. I also like obsession, because if there's something that you naturally are so inclined to be obsessed about, like I'm talking every hour of every day you're thinking about it. It could literally be anything. Obviously there are some unhealthy obsessions, but most obsessions are healthy, right? At least that you could dig in and be like, oh man, I'm obsessed about music, obsessed about arts and culture, obsessed about architecture, obsessed about, even just anything that doesn't even seem to be formal. You could be obsessed about collecting shoes, which by the way was my brother, and he is a sneakerhead, as they call it. And guess what? He ended up in fashion, but he ended up in marketing for fashion. And it was a perfect culmination of all these things, in his life. But obsession leads to understanding your passion, because it shows as well to employers and then even to investors that you have the capability of going deep into something, right? I think to be an entrepreneur in a field, you are literally going to live and breathe this thing. You can't even stop it. There's no stopping it. Like this is unstoppable, because every hour I'm thinking about it. I'm constantly, because it's my life. It's what I'm now living. So that's why obsession is critical.
I want to take another question that I put out there in different situations, and that is this idea where you want to quote be your own boss. That's a big mentality for a lot of people who are in their um, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. They quote want to be their own boss. How does that translate to entrepreneurship, or how does that translate to stepping out on your own?
So several flavors of it. Be your own boss could be just self-employed, right? You just literally are a contractor. You help out with projects. You kind of set your own agenda. It's great. Honestly, in the context of actually starting a company with other people that are involved, you actually it takes on an entirely new meaning, right? What it is you're not even your own boss. You're not even the boss of other folks. They're the boss of you. So the best way to describe it is the word I use. It's something that I think in the business world now people are using more and more of, is subservient management. When you start the company, really all you've done is you've initiated the project. It is now live. It has a life of its own. And the more you try to dictate the life, the more it'll actually fight back. You almost need people to then tell you what they want to do with it, and it requires letting go of some control, which is honestly very terrifying for a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, because to be honest, we started this because we're a bit of control freaks, right? We want to make sure that everything is perfect and everything is the way that we want. And like I told you, remember I said I want to be the one who not only pays for my own mistakes but also benefits from all the successes. But you'll learn very quickly that it's nothing to do with you anymore. It's everything to do with the folks that have joined you on that journey forward. So that's kind of how I paint it. It's like if you're going to be your own boss, it's a bit of a misnomer, because you won't be your own boss. Everyone will be the boss of you, especially if it's going to be a company that you end up starting with other people in it.
Yes, yes. A follow-up question to that, which relates to a lot of questions my students have, is how do you find those people that you want to surround yourself with that want to go on that journey with you?
Well, to be honest, it's a bit of a kind of an X factor there, right? So one of the things that investors look for in founders that they want to, invest in, is folks that have this uncanny ability to gather people around them and rally them around a particular objective, or in a case of a company around making money and growing it and selling it, or IPOing it. I would say what I've observed with folks that are able to do that is infectious energy. It's relentlessness. It's almost the ability it's that reality distortion field concept that was, kind of talked about in the context of Steve Jobs. It's like, can you convince, like in my case, can you convince someone who has a very, very well-paying, stable job at a large company with a great gig, with a family, by the way, to then walk home one day to his wife or her husband and say, hey, I'm going to go join this 19-year-old and we're going to change mobile advertising together. It's like, are you crazy, right? So there is, can you convince people to be crazy with you? I think there's tactical ways to do it. Like I said, the energy. It's like when you're so excited about something and your passion is really shows, people around you be like, wait a second, why are you so excited about this? There must be a reason for your excitement. And that reason is something I'm so curious to find out about. And I'd rather take the risk of trying to find out what that reason is with you than to not, right? So that whole curiosity factor plays in as well. So that's one big one, is the excitement factor. The second is um, making sure that you have a really good handle of kind of taking inventory of your network. So one thing that people forget is you meet tons of people all the time. It's just a matter of understanding how they play in the stage of your life and what you're trying to achieve. And for me, honestly, it was about activating my network at the time. So, for example, we needed a head of sales, and guess who I could think of was the head of sales for Dig in New York. And he had left the company and with that whole turmoil that was happening. And I reached out to him. I said, hey, do you want to work with me on this thing we're doing? And he's like, sure. And so you dig into what you have. And I think the problem is intentionally networking is sometimes very potentially detrimental, because then it's too obvious that you want something from someone. If things happen serendipitously, as it were, the natural path is what makes it more attractive for folks, right? People want to feel like they kind of happened upon this golden opportunity. They don't want to feel like it was like strategically designed for them to fall into something. You know what I mean? And people love the idea of spontaneity and serendipity. It's just part of a natural thing that human beings are drawn to. So there you go.
Yeah. There are two sides of that too, right? One side of it is in New York City, where we have so many things going on, it really is possible to go out and meet people in a random kind of situation.
Anything. Totally.
Yeah. And there's so many different types of events that are happening where people aren't necessarily networking, but they're hanging around for that particular industry. So if you're in the marketing industry, there's all kinds of different marketing events that happen in different places. Sometimes you're actually going out and looking for things. But I tell my students, just talk about your curiosity, talk about why you're here and what you're curious about, and what you, not necessarily what you're looking for as much as being yourself, like show people who you are, because that's going to lead to a natural relationship with someone who may or may not become a co-founder, may or may not become a supporter, a funder,
Totally.
all kinds of different things.
But I think the best read on who might be the best to work with is someone you've actually worked with. So that's why, like I said, recruiting from my former employer, and then also when you're in school, you have group projects, right? That is a huge part of any MBA or business program. It's designed to be that way. I'm sure you can attest. Is nothing in business is a singular sort of endeavor. So when you do have multiple people in your group, you can see how they're like in the execution part of things, right? Like how can they actually execute? Because it's really good to talk, but if you're in a group work and you find that there's two folks in that team they're just machines. They just execute like mad. They don't complain. They're constructive. They're good to work with. Keep them close to you, because even if their expertise isn't in your field, right? One thing I've learned is there are very few, and very rare, I'd call good people out there, meaning folks who literally you just have a great feeling around, that is on the same wavelength as you just vibe with, is like I guess the slang. Do you vibe? What's the vibe? And if the vibe is super good, like keep them close. And that's how I've honestly found most of our hires, and you'll hear this all the time, is from people who I vibe with well, who then introduce me to people that they vibe with well. And then naturally, because you vibe with them, you're going to vibe with the other people. And it's a very, very natural approach to building it.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's great. Super advice. Wow. That's perfect. Um, how much do you need to know before you go into a field? Like, how much do you need to know before you create a company, before you get a job in that area, before
Yep.
you do whatever?
It's a fantastic question. My answer is not too much, especially today in 2018. Now, I always have to preface this by saying, luckily at least I am in an industry where we're not like curing cancer or anything, and it's not like we're saving lives. Like it's funny. Like I'll always talk about, especially when an employee is super stressed out, right? They're like, "Oh my god, I made a mistake." Oh, I'm like, no one's gonna die. Like you're okay. There are people at Mount Sinai where people will die. So luckily we're in a good situation. So in those situations, of course, you need to know too much, right? Like otherwise you cut the wrong part of the body open and you kill someone. But in the case of business, especially if business in the field of tech or marketing or whatever we're talking about here, if you know too much, unfortunately, because the space changes so much, you start to feel this false sense of confidence that you understand a particular area. And once you have a false sense of confidence, it's extremely dangerous because it's really hard to roll back from being the guy who's the expert on something, right? You're like, yeah, I'm the expert. And I like despise the word. And if anyone ever claims that they're an expert, I'm like, you're not. In fact, by saying that you are, you already admitted you're not. Because you might have been an expert at something 3 months ago, but that certainly makes you less inclined and wanting to learn more because you've already felt like you've hit your peak, or you've already felt like you've hit that level. And today, the landscape has changed so much, you shouldn't really even feel like you should be at that level. So I think the constantly curious is the key. And I describe in my book, I say, the stuff of brilliance and being legendary is just being able to learn just that much faster than the next person. Right? It isn't about knowing the whole body of knowledge. It's literally about, did you learn enough about this faster than the next person that's in the same field as you so that you can get ahead of them, right? And that's why speed of absorption and speed of execution and testing, the person who's made the most mistakes in the field first, honestly, is that person who has the most knowledge to at least be able to execute in a way that has enough practical knowledge behind it. And I know that's a bit theoretical in how I'm describing it, but I hope it makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Well, it makes sense to me. My students will ask other questions maybe, and I'll forward those to you at some point and be like, here are the 6 questions they had about your video that these people watched it later and they just didn't
like
get.
What? Yeah, exactly.
But that'll be fine. We'll do that. I am very curious about, because I talk about this some in some areas that I know a little bit about, and I won't call myself an expert anymore. Now,
I mean, you have the title to be one because you're a professor, but yeah.
No, it doesn't. But that's the point. Like I make that point with my students all the time. I say, guys, I know more than you, but there are ways that you're going to learn about things that I will not know anything about, and you'll become the person that knows more, right? Because it's just a question of the volume of knowledge that you know and how well you put the pieces together.
Well, it's a structure of learning, right? It's learning how to learn, right? I think most of the, like, honestly, and again, because I didn't do an MBA program, I can't conclude for them, but at least for me, the biggest takeaway from my undergrad was knowing how much I don't know, right? Like just how stupid I am in the context of the whole world. And then the second was how to then find the answers to the questions that you want to find as efficiently and as thoroughly as possible. And those were the biggest takeaways. And I think the structure of analyzing and making sense of problems in the world is really the main takeaway from, I think, any university.
Yeah. Let's talk for a second, just so I want to go there. We're already only 6 minutes left, but zoom, super fast. This is fantastic, by the way. You're an incredible interview. One of the best. I really appreciate your knowledge, and it's coming out great for all the people. There's a ton of questions that have flowed in on my device. I did mention to my students blockchain and marketing in one class, and they came up with a set of questions. They're trying to understand at the basic level, what are some of the ways that blockchain might change that? And, give your perspective of what blockchain means in relationship to marketing. I'd love for you to do that just because of where you are.
Yeah. And you might have saw on my LinkedIn that I posted an article about how, blockchain could change the advertising industry forever. So if students want to read a bit more, just mosey on to my LinkedIn and you'll see my thorough thoughts on it. But I'll give kind of like the cliff notes because I think it's worth discussing. So I'm assuming people who are watching this have at least a basic understanding of blockchain. So I don't want to explain the basics, but what blockchain will do for more specifically advertising, which is the space that I'm in, is really the spirit of blockchain is two concepts. It's decentralization, so removal of a central authority, and an immutable ledger that again is controlled by these decentralized nodes. And I think the beauty and oh yeah, it's immutability of that means that there's radical transparency as well, right? So there's radical transparency and decentralization. Advertising, as we all are aware, there's a duopoly that controls a large chunk of the digital advertising ecosystem, Google and Facebook. And what happens is basically, I think the statistics are crazy, like 80% of all digital ad dollars go to Google and Facebook. It's insane. And not only that, but not only they make money on the ad dollars, but they also make money on your data. So what I feel is there's an opportunity to imagine, you know, and when you think about it, the way an ad gets delivered to you, right? It's you know, Unilever or P&G or Johnson and Johnson decides that they want to tell you about their new product. And then from the point of their dollar to then the ad being shown to you is like there's 17 different parties involved, you know, like agencies, media buying agencies, the, you know, data targeting, the DSPs, the SSPs, you name it. All these middlemen, imagine them all gone, right? Imagine it literally is $1 to you and then to the publisher. And there's only 3 parties here. And the blockchain and the ecosystem that is represented in that blockchain is this token of media. At the end of the day, there is $1 that's being spent to reach you. There is. But out of that $1, how much ends up going to the publisher and how much ends up going to everyone in the middle? You would be very amazed to see. So I think, you know, I'm not trying to say that none of the technologies in the stack make sense. I'm just saying that they can all use the token to then show what value they're providing in that stack, right? So that's kind of the best way to describe it is right now there is no transparency. No one knows what is happening to that $1 when it comes to you as the person. But with the token, all of these things end up getting recorded in the blockchain. Whether or not you saw or cared about the ad is also recorded there. And then using technologies like smart contracts, now the actual dollar, because it was designed to reach you as the demographic, is then dictated within the dollar itself, right? Within the token, you know, using smart contracts, especially in Ethereum. So I think it's almost like this industry needed this, you know, and I think it's now had the peak into what impact it can make. The only risk I would tell you is, like every industry, is resistance from the big players. And I think Google and Facebook may not care and may not want to, and because they don't, it may not happen. But you're already starting to see initiatives like Better Ads Coalition from Google and others where they recognize that the ad blocking problem is becoming very real. And if everyone starts to ad block, everyone starts to turn on do not track, then the ad industry really has no place in this world. So we need to prove, it's almost a race to prove that the ad industry has value to them. You know, I almost joke, it's like the first industry where it doesn't actually matter if you care or like the ad, right? It really doesn't. Like you could ignore all the ads in the world, but it's still money being spent, right? So what industry is it like? It's almost like a coffee shop that no one wants the coffee, right? It just makes no sense. So we know that we need to make an industry where that people actually want the coffee.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. A very and a useful, practical way to put it as well. I know when I talk about this, I say, so imagine the internet in 1996 when I saw it first emerge in 1997, and I was teaching an e-commerce class back then, right? It was about putting shopping carts into websites, right? That's what e-commerce was. No one understood even that back then. So imagine that. That's what blockchain is right now. So blockchain looks and feels like that original internet felt. It had some basic things built on it, and tons of people are making money in certain contexts because it is more advanced, and we do have a mature internet to work with. So it is a different place, and people can build things, and the knowledge about the technology grows really fast. So the Wild West or the gold rush truly can happen. But beyond that, it is the super early days of the industry.
Totally. And don't make the technology the focal point. That's also what I find. Like, you know, it's like when you make it just what you're doing, like I'm building a blockchain company, it isn't sustainable, right? You should think of the long-term impact of what the end goal is, and then blockchain is one of said technologies that'll help you achieve it. And I think that's the best way to build a sustainable business, because again, blockchain today could be really hot. Tomorrow, it may not even be called blockchain. It may have sort of components of it that are from that early concept of having this finite, immutable digital ledger with currency associated with it, but it shouldn't be the main thing that you're focused on. And I think that hopefully can resonate with some of the folks that are watching.
Definitely. Brian, thank you so much for your time and your insights today. They were certainly exactly what my students were looking for. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
All right, Brian, and other folks, we appreciate your time. Thanks for watching the eShip Show. Come back at us. We'll see us next week or some other time where we'll be around. We show up about every week, every 2 weeks. This week has been super special just because it's the National Entrepreneurship Week, and we've had really special guests every day of the week this week. Be sure you go out and check out the website Kiip, KIIP.com. That is Brian's website and web services. You'll see his agency is there, and they do phenomenal work, very interesting. And of course, approach him about a job. It's always good to get a job out of these things, right? Right, Brian?
Sure thing.
All right, man. Have a great one.
All right. Take care.
Ciao.